3 days before my wedding, my future in-laws handed me a prenup during a charity gala in front of 200 guests. They didn't pull me aside quietly. They didn't send a lawyer in a crisp suit. They waited until I was standing under a crystal chandelier, smiling for photographers, holding a glass of champagne. And then, just like a magician with a cruel trick, they produced a leather folder and a pen. They said it was a Blackwood family tradition. I remember the way the room seemed to tilt, how the polite chatter faded into a low hum, as if everyone had suddenly stopped pretending not to watch. Victoria, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had finally cornered her prey. "It's just paperwork, dear," she said into the microphone, her voice smooth and warm enough to sound harmless. "Sign it now, and we can all get back to celebrating." My fiancé, Ethan, stood off to the side, not intervening, not even meeting my eyes. I should have felt rage. I should have stormed out, caused a scene. But instead, I smiled. I closed the folder without looking at it, handed it back, and said, "We'll need a private room." My voice didn't shake. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Because what they didn't know, what they had never even considered, was that I was worth $30 million. My name is Sophia Williams. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom house in Chicago, the daughter of 2 high school teachers who spent more on books than vacations. I worked for everything. I have scholarships, late nights, skipped parties, taking every opportunity I could to build something that was mine. By the time I turned 30, I was running a nationally recognized edtech company, partnering with school districts across the country to make sure kids who didn't have much could still have a shot at the best education possible. It wasn't flashy work, but it was mine. And while the world saw a neatly dressed woman driving a 5-year-old Audi, what they didn't see was the portfolio I had quietly built: real estate, index funds, and a company recently valued at $30 million. I had kept that side of me hidden, partly out of privacy, partly out of curiosity. I wanted to know how people treated me without the armor of money. I wanted to be loved for the woman I was, not the balance in my accounts. Meeting Ethan had felt like proof that was possible. He was an assistant district attorney, sharp, principled, and so different from the privilege he'd been born into. We met at a fundraiser for underfunded schools, bonded over spicy Thai food, and our mutual belief that the right kind of stubborn could change the world. But the Blackwoods, his family, saw me differently. From the first dinner at their estate, where the driveway was longer than my entire street, Victoria's questions were always coated in sugar but sharpened underneath. "Northwestern, a fine school. Did you find the scholarship program comprehensive?" She never asked what my parents taught, only how challenging it must have been financially. I ignored the digs. I told myself that once we were married, she'd have no choice but to accept me. Until that night at the gala. That's when I realized this wasn't about a legal document. It wasn't even about protecting assets. This was a public performance, a message to me, and to everyone watching, about who held the power. And they thought I'd play along. If you've ever been underestimated by people who measured your worth in the wrong currency, you'll understand what came next. Before I tell you how I turned that moment on its head and made the Blackwoods regret ever trying to humiliate me, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button if you believe quiet people are often the most dangerous. And tell me in the comments, has anyone ever mistaken your silence for weakness? Because they did, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. You'd think growing up without money would make you desperate to marry into it. But for me, it did the opposite. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Our house was old but warm, filled with books, hand-me-down furniture, and conversations about justice, education, and doing the right thing even when no one noticed. My parents weren't rich. They were high school teachers who believed in kids more than in systems. And somehow, they believed in me more than I believed in myself. I got my first computer when I was 12. It was slow, second-hand, and crashed twice a week. But I was obsessed. While other kids played games, I taught myself to code first HTML, then Python, then C++. I built my own calculator app by 13, an educational game for my mom's ESL students by 14, and by 16. I had won a scholarship to a tech boot camp that changed everything. By the time I graduated from Northwestern with a degree in computer science, I already had job offers from 3 major firms. But I turned them down. I wanted to build something that mattered something for kids who came from where I came from. So I launched an edtech company from my dorm room and named it after my grandmother, who taught literacy in community centers even after she lost her sight. My startup didn't go viral overnight. It was 3 years of grant proposals, ramen dinners, missed birthdays, and a dozen no's for every maybe. But eventually, schools noticed. We got our first big contract with a district in Detroit, then another in Austin, and then came the grant from the Department of Education. That's when the numbers started to change. My grandfather had left me $7 million in inheritance. I only learned about the year he died. He had been a janitor, lived modestly, and invested like a genius. I used a small portion to keep the business afloat, but the rest I let grow, quietly, diversified, watched, protected. I never talked about my money, not out of shame, but because I wanted my life to be about what I created, not what I could buy. So when I met Ethan Blackwood at a gala for underfunded schools, I didn't lead with my net worth. I was there because my company had donated software to 5 schools in the area. He was there representing the district attorney's office, making connections, giving a short speech about why education mattered more than prosecution. We ended up talking for an hour, not about wealth, or family names, or resumes. We talked about how education was the great equalizer, about our favorite bad takeout spots, about how we both hated performative charity and loved long hikes with no cell signal. He was warm, funny, and brilliant without showing off. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. Our first date was at a small hole-in-the-wall Thai place. He showed up in jeans and a hoodie and said, "I looked up your company. You're doing good work." That was Ethan Curious, thoughtful, grounded. We were inseparable after that, hiking on weekends, cooking disasters in my kitchen, deep talks about justice, policy, race, equity, and where we fit in this broken but still worth fighting for world. He didn't care about appearances. Neither did I. And that's what made it work. Or so I thought. I met his parents 6 months in. The Blackwood estate looked like something out of a Netflix series. Stone arches, fountains, gardens trimmed like art. I parked my modest Audi between 2 luxury SUVs and walked up the steps already bracing myself. Victoria Blackwood greeted me in a navy silk dress that probably cost more than my rent. Her smile was polite, but her eyes scanned me like I was an underqualified applicant. Richard Blackwood, her husband and Ethan's father, shook my hand like he was testing my grip for weakness. Dinner was exquisite, so was the judgment. Northwestern Victoria said, swirling her wine. A fine school. Did you find the scholarship program? Adequate. Very generous, I said with a smile. Covered everything. And your parents, she asked. Teachers. Yes, what a noble profession. Very grounding. Ethan tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but it was clear I didn't fit. Not in their legacy, not in their expectations. And yet, they tolerated me. I think they thought I'd go away eventually, that I was a phase. But then Ethan proposed. It was beautiful, on a quiet beach during a weekend trip to Traverse City, just the 2 of us. Sunset, his grandmother's emerald ring. I said yes through tears, not because of the ring, because I believed in the life we were building. The wedding planning began, and that's when the clause came out. Victoria offered to handle most of it, said she had the connections, the taste, The experience, I let her run with it. It didn't matter to me where the flowers came from or which bakery she preferred. I just wanted to marry Ethan. But little by little, she took over everything. The venue, that little art center you liked, won't accommodate our guest list. The dress, something a bit more. Classic would suit the family photographs better, the guest list. Suddenly filled with people I'd never met, family friends who were really board members and golf buddies. Ethan tried to help, to mediate. Sometimes he pushed back. Most of the time, he suggested I let it go. So I did, until I barely recognized the wedding I had imagined. Except for one thing, my dress. A sleek, modern gown I chose myself. Not extravagant, but elegant. Me. When Victoria saw it, she smiled that smile again. Lovely, she said. So? Sensible. I brushed it off. But the truth was starting to settle in. I wasn't being included, I was being managed. And the closer the wedding got, the more I felt it. The invisible box I was expected to fit into. Quiet, grateful, pretty, accommodating. But I didn't explode. I didn't confront. I watched. I waited. I took notes. And then came the gala. The moment they tried to break me in front of everyone. And that was the beginning of the end of their illusion. The signs were always there, small, calculated, wrapped in good manners and silk gloves. Victoria didn't scream. She didn't throw tantrums or forbid things. She just rearranged them, quietly, permanently. She started with the guest list. Ethan and I had agreed on something intimate, 80 people, friends, family, people who'd watched us grow, who mattered. But by the third week of planning, it had ballooned to 240. It's standard for our family, she told me over brunch. We can't exclude the Thompsons or the Chamberlains. Richard's firm represents all of them. And it would be rude not to invite the judge who officiated Ethan's brother's wedding. Don't worry, we'll cover the cost. I should have pushed back, but I didn't. I let it slide. Then came the venue. We had originally picked this gorgeous industrial space, exposed brick, string lights, big windows overlooking the river. It felt like us. Victoria had other ideas. The acoustics are awful, she said bluntly, and the parking situation is a nightmare. Besides, it doesn't reflect the Blackwood legacy. You understand. We compromised on a ballroom at the Hawthorne Club, the kind of place where no one laughs too loudly and the chandeliers cost more than my college tuition. The flowers changed. The menu changed. The vibe changed. The only thing that stayed was my dress, and even that became a point of tension. It's very modern, Victoria said when she saw the photo. I just wonder, does it say timeless or does it say tech startup gala? I smiled. It says bride. That's enough. Ethan backed me on that. He tried, honestly. But the deeper we got into planning, the more I realized how much he'd been trained to tiptoe around his parents. They mean well, he'd say. It's just their way. No, I thought that it's just control wrapped in expensive fabric. But I held it in. I kept peace. Because the wedding wasn't the war. It was the front. And I hadn't yet decided to fight. Until the gala. 3 days before the wedding, we were supposed to celebrate. The Blackwoods were hosting a benefit event for their family foundation. It was an annual affair, black tie, art auction, 5-figure plates, the works. This year's proceeds were going toward education reform initiatives in Chicago, which, ironically, my company had contributed to. I was there as both Ethan's fiancé and as a professional partner. I wore a sleek navy gown, had my hair done, and even let Victoria pair me with one of her diamond necklaces to complete the look. For once, she seemed almost pleasant. The ballroom glittered, waiters passed champagne, and guests floated from one art piece to another, murmuring the way rich people do when pretending they care about social change. I mingled. smiled, answered questions about my company's work. It was going well, until it wasn't. Halfway through the evening, Victoria took the stage. The lights dimmed, music softened, and she tapped the microphone with manicured fingers. "Before we continue the auction," she said, "we'd like to take a moment for something special." She gestured toward Ethan and me. I blinked. This wasn't on the schedule. I looked at Ethan. He looked nervous. Victoria beamed. "As you all know, our son Ethan is about to marry a remarkable woman. Sophia has joined our family not just with grace and poise, but with a deep commitment to education and equity values we cherish deeply." Applause. I smiled politely, waiting for it to end. Then she added, "As is tradition in our family, we like to formalize every union with clarity and mutual respect." And that's when Richard stepped forward, holding a leather-bound folder. "Ethan and Sophia," he said into the mic, "we'd like to invite you both up here to sign the Blackwood family marital agreement. A formality. Of course, just paperwork, but a meaningful one." There it was. The prenup, in public. There was a brief, stunned silence, then polite claps, a few curious murmurs. Ethan leaned toward me and whispered, "I didn't know they'd do it this way." I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not anger, something colder, more exact. I looked out over the crowd. People were watching. Cameras hovered. Smiles tightened. If I refused, I'd be emotional, difficult, possibly even the woman who ended her own wedding in front of Chicago's elite. If I agreed, I'd be surrendering. So I did neither. I walked to the microphone, took the folder, and smiled. "Thank you, Victoria," I said calmly. "And thank you, Richard. We'd be happy to review this. Privately." Laughter? Awkward? Brittle. Victoria's smile flickered. "Of course," she said. "We assumed it would be a formality." "Oh, I'm sure it will be," I said. "We'll just take a moment alone to read through it. After all, mutual respect, right?" And with that, I walked off stage, holding the prenup like it was just another document in a boardroom. In the hallway, Ethan caught up to me. "I swear I didn't know," he said. "They mentioned a prenup weeks ago, but I didn't think—" "You didn't think they'd ambush me at a gala?" I asked. "On stage 3 days before the wedding." He paused. "I should have warned you." You think I snapped, then stopped myself, took a breath. "Sorry," I said, voice steady. "I just need to read this. Alone." And I left. I got into my car, folder still clutched in hand. I drove until the buildings blurred and my brain stopped spinning. When I finally pulled over, I opened the prenup. It wasn't just one-sided, it was surgical. Everything Ethan owned, family assets, properties, trusts, would remain untouched in case of divorce. Anything we acquired together, also protected under original ownership. But the part that really made me laugh, Section 4, intellectual property. If I developed anything during the marriage, it could be subject to joint evaluation by Blackwood legal representatives. Translation: my company, my life's work could be up for grabs. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about marriage. It was about control, ownership, legacy. They didn't see me as a partner. They saw me as a risk, a disruption to the family line, a girl with a pretty smile and a good head, who didn't know her place. They wanted to put me in mine, but they'd made one mistake. They thought I had nothing to protect. And that's when I stopped being angry. I started planning. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. My apartment felt too small, too quiet for the kind of betrayal I had just absorbed. Instead, I parked on the rooftop level of a 24-hour grocery store and sat there in the dark, the Chicago skyline flickering around me like a backdrop to someone else's life. I should have cried, should have yelled, but I didn't. My hands rested on the leather folder in my lap like it was radioactive. Inside, page after page of legal language tried to erase everything I'd built. My company, my independence, my future, all with clauses so clean, so polished, you'd almost miss the blood underneath. And Ethan. God, Ethan. I kept seeing his face as I walked off that stage, confused, maybe even a little hurt, but not surprised. That was the worst part. Because deep down, I think he knew what they were doing, and he let it happen. He probably thought I'd take it in stride. Like everything else, smile, adapt, be gracious, be grateful, be manageable. But something inside me had snapped, and not in the loud, dramatic way. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. I picked up my phone and texted one name, Harold Winters. He'd been my grandfather's attorney for decades. Smart, sharp, old school, but lethal when it counted. He once stared down an IRS audit without flinching and won an investor lawsuit that saved my company's first round of funding. More than that, he was loyal. I typed, need an urgent meeting, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Prenup situation, wedding in 72 hours. We'll explain everything. His reply came back 60 seconds later, I'll be there. Bring the document and coffee. I went home and pulled up my full portfolio. Savings, investments, real estate, intellectual property agreements, company valuation reports, every contract, every clause. I printed it all, sorted it into a binder, and labeled every section like I was prepping for trial. Because that's what this was now. Not a wedding, a war. At 6:30 the next morning, I walked into my downtown office in a fitted charcoal gray pantsuit and low heels. No makeup, hair slicked back, just me and the kind of silence that doesn't beg for attention, it commands it. Harold arrived at 700 sharp, wearing a pinstripe suit and the same scuffed briefcase he'd carried for 20 years. His face, usually warm, was hard when he saw the folder in my hands. So, he said, settling in across from me, tell me everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. The public ambush, the timing, the specific language in the document, especially the section on intellectual property, the threats, veiled and otherwise. He read every page in total silence. His brow never moved, but his jaw set tighter and tighter. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm, but lethal. This is one of the most offensive prenups I've seen in 40 years. It's not protection, it's ownership. I know, I said. That's why we're not fighting it. We're rewriting it. He smiled, not kindly, strategically. That's the spirit. We spent the next 3 hours drafting a new agreement from scratch. It was everything theirs wasn't. It acknowledged my net worth $30 million and protected it. It preserved Ethan's assets and family holdings. It carved out clear terms for any property or income acquired during the marriage. It explicitly barred any claims to my company, my software, or any future development I created. It was balanced, professional, ruthless in its fairness. By the time we finished, the stack of papers felt like armor, not a weapon, a shield. Then came the plan. I need to meet with Ethan first. I said, just him? Face to face. Harold nodded. Good. If he stands with you, you walk in strong. If he doesn't, well, you walk in stronger. He pulled out a separate folder. Here's a summarized breakdown of your financial standing. Let them see the truth they assumed didn't exist. I reviewed every page, every clause. This wasn't revenge for me. This was restoration, a reset. They had painted a story about me, a sweet, underprivileged girl marrying up into wealth, and expected me to play the role without asking questions. I wasn't playing anymore. That afternoon, I texted Ethan, we need to talk, just us, 1 p.m. at Carlucci's. He replied right away, I'll be there. I love you. I didn't answer, not because I didn't love him, but because I needed to know something deeper. I needed to know if he still saw me as an equal, or just as a woman he hoped would keep things quiet. At 12:30, I walked into the restaurant early, requested a quiet booth in the back, and ordered sparkling water. No wine, no distractions. When Ethan walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was crooked. His eyes were tired, but his face softened when he saw me. "Soph," he said, sliding into the booth. "I've been going crazy. I didn't know they'd do that last night. I'm so sorry." I watched him carefully. "But you knew there was a prenup." He nodded. "They brought it up a few weeks ago. I didn't think they'd push it. Definitely not like that. You didn't think your parents, the ones who tried to rewrite my wedding dress, would make legal demands." He exhaled. "I guess I was hoping it would go away." I looked him dead in the eye. It didn't. Then I slid the folder across the table. He opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, the financial summary, the new agreement. Slowly, his expression shifted from confusion to shock to something close to awe. "You're worth $30 million, he whispered. I didn't flinch. "And that's why I'm not signing anything that turns me into your family's property." He kept flipping through the document. "This is balanced. Fair. This is better than the one they gave you." "I know," I said, "because I wrote it. With my lawyer, who treats me like a CEO, not a child." He looked up at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to know who you were without the money between us." He swallowed. "And do you still believe in me?" I studied his face. He looked scared. Not of me, but of what this moment meant. Of what it asked of him. "I want to," I said softly. "But that depends on what you do next." The check arrived. Neither of us touched it. "I'm meeting your parents tonight," I said. 6 p.m., Lakeview. You can come with me, or not. But that contract is the only one I'm signing." He nodded. "I'll be there. And I'll back you. Fully." I didn't smile. Not yet. But I nodded. "Then bring your spine. And wear something sharp. We're not going in as guests. We're going in as a team." The only thing sharper than my outfit that night was my resolve. By 5:50 p.m., Ethan and I stood outside the Lakeview restaurant, Chicago's most polished slice of neutral territory. I had chosen it carefully. Not too cold, not too familiar. Elegant enough to satisfy Victoria's sense of image, but public enough that no one could raise their voice without drawing attention. Ethan straightened his tie, his expression unreadable. I adjusted my blazer, smoothed the crease on my cream dress, and slid the leather folder into my tote bag like a sword into its sheath. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "As I'll ever be," I said. "Let's finish this." The maitre d' led us through a maze of soft lighting and murmured conversation to the private dining room I had reserved. Crystal stemware glittered beneath the chandelier. The mahogany table was set for 4. They weren't there yet. "They'll be late," Ethan said, pulling out my chair for me. Power move. Mom never arrives anywhere before making people wait at least 15 minutes. He wasn't wrong. At 6:17 sharp, the door opened. Victoria glided in wearing a deep burgundy dress and diamonds that sparkled like ice. Richard followed, all charcoal wool and quiet command. They looked like a closing argument walking on 2 legs. "Ethan, darling," Victoria said, kissing his cheek. She didn't even glance at me. What a charming choice of venue, though I'm not sure why this couldn't be handled over email. Richard nodded at me with professional indifference. "Sophia." I stood and gestured to the chairs across from us. "Please, have a seat. There's a lot to go over." They sat. The air tightened. "We've reviewed your prenuptial agreement," Ethan began. His voice was steady, firm, and we found it unacceptable, both in content and in approach. Richard raised an eyebrow. It's the standard family contract. Your siblings both signed without issue. They married people from the same socioeconomic tier. Ethan said, "That's not the case here. The power dynamics are different, and the contract reflects that imbalance." Victoria chuckled lightly. "This isn't sociology class, Ethan. It's a legal formality." I opened my tote, pulled out the revised contract, and slid it across the table. We agree legal clarity is important, which is why we've prepared a version that protects both parties fairly. Richard frowned as he opened the folder. Victoria didn't touch it. She kept her gaze locked on me. "You came to the family with nothing," she said flatly. "Now you want to negotiate." I smiled, calm, measured. "That's where you're wrong." I reached into the folder again and laid out the financial summary. 1 page. Simple. Brutal. "My current net worth is approximately $30 million, I said evenly. "A mix of investments, property, and a company valued at $15 million and climbing." The room fell silent. Victoria blinked. Richard reached for the page, scanning it with disbelief that morphed into calculation. "You concealed this?" he asked. "I chose not to perform it," I replied. "There's a difference." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Why now?" "Because now," I said, "you've made it clear how you perceive me, and I no longer benefit from staying quiet." Richard set the financials down and turned back to the contract. He began flipping through, eyes trained. "This agreement protects both family assets," I continued, "and mine. It includes fair division terms, full separation of business interests, and intellectual property clauses that prevent any claim to my company now or in the future." Victoria finally picked up the papers. Her voice was quieter now. "Why didn't you tell us before?" "Because I wanted to be treated like a person, not a portfolio." Ethan looked at his parents. "And because you tried to humiliate her, in public, with legal threats disguised as tradition." Victoria drew a slow breath. "You've clearly prepared." 3 days before my wedding, I said, "Your family handed me a threat in front of donors and photographers. That's not protection, that's coercion. And I don't sign contracts under threat." Richard cleared his throat, regaining composure. "We'll need to review this with our attorneys." "You have until tomorrow afternoon," I said. "To Pummy, the wedding is in less than 48 hours. Victoria glanced at Ethan. "And what happens if we refuse?" Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "Then we cancel, publicly, and I will explain exactly why." Victoria stiffened. "You would do that to your family?" "I would do it for my wife," he said. "If you force me to choose." Another silence. Richard folded the document and nodded. "We'll be in touch by morning." The meeting ended with no handshakes, no hugs, just a mutual understanding the rules had changed. As they left the room, Victoria paused at the door. Her voice, though soft, carried weight. "You're not what I expected, Sophia." I tilted my head. "That was your first mistake." Then she was gone. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally releasing. "You were," he began, shaking his head. "You were incredible." I smiled at him. "We were," because it wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. It was about respect, partnership, truth. And finally, we had all three. They signed it. No lawyers, no red lines, no passive-aggressive notes. Just a brief email the next morning. Reviewed. Terms acceptable. Signed copy attached. That was it. After all the posturing, the condescension, the calculated humiliation they folded, not because they respected me, not yet, but because they had no leverage left. The contract was fair. Public sentiment was on my side, and Ethan had finally made it clear this marriage would either be built on equality or not happen at all. 2 days later, I stood in the quiet bridal suite of the Drake Hotel, staring at my reflection. Same dress, no changes, no compromises. Jenna stood behind me, adjusting the veil. "You look like you just won a war," she said. I did. I smiled. And I still get the cake. My mom added a soft amen from across the room. Then, unexpectedly, there was a knock. "Victoria?" She stepped inside in a pale blue dress that made her seem softer. In her hand was a small velvet box. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one." I didn't speak. I just waited. "I misjudged you. I tried to control something that wasn't mine to shape." She opened the box and handed it to me, sapphire and diamond earrings, clearly antique. "These belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother. She married into this family without a dime and later saved it from collapse." A beat passed. "I think she would have liked you," Victoria said. For the first time, I believed her. I wore the earrings down the aisle. Not as a gift, but as a message. That power, when earned not inherited, is the only kind that lasts. The ceremony was simple, elegant, exactly what we wanted. I walked down the aisle in the dress they once called too modern, the sapphire earrings glinting beneath my veil. Ethan's face when he saw me honestly. It erased every sleepless night of that week. We exchanged vows under a vaulted ceiling and soft candlelight. But it wasn't just our words that mattered. It was everything we didn't say. Everything we had survived. The applause at the end was polite, warm. But what came after that was different. People approached me differently now. Not as the bride, but as someone they respected. A woman who hadn't just married into the Blackwoods, but had stood toe-to-toe with them and demanded to be seen. Even Richard shook my hand and introduced me to his business partners as Sophia, the founder I mentioned, the one changing public education. Victoria. She hovered at the edge of the room most of the evening, watching, measuring. But when we finally locked eyes across the crowd, she gave me the smallest, most reluctant nod. I returned it, nothing more. Because power dynamics don't flip with a smile. They shift with consistency. Our honeymoon was a blur of sun, sea, and silence the good kind. We walked through whitewashed villages in Greece, ate way too much baklava, and left our phones in the hotel safe. For the first time in weeks, we breathed. We also talked about money, boundaries, family, the kind of marriage we wanted to build now that the fantasy had been burned down and rebuilt with truth. 6 months later, we were tested again. Victoria began pushing for Sunday dinners. "Tradition," she said. But Ethan held the line. "Once a month. Our schedule matters too." She didn't fight it, not this time. Richard asked me to advise on digital upgrades for their law firm. No ego, just respect. And when my company signed a multi-million-dollar contract with the Chicago Public School System, both of them shockingly sent handwritten congratulations. Was it perfect? No. But the foundation had changed. Because I had changed. I stopped trying to be likable. I stopped softening my voice to fit into their idea of what a daughter-in-law should be. And I stopped pretending that success had to look like silence. I've learned something: people only treat you the way you let them. When I let the Blackwoods assume I was lucky to be part of their world, they treated me like a project they needed to manage. But when I showed up with truth, receipts, and a spine, they had no choice but to meet me at eye level. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about what happens when someone tries to rewrite your story, and you refuse to hand over the pen. To the world, I might still be the girl who married into money. But to me, I know I walked into that family with more value than they were ready to see, and I made sure they saw it anyway. And now, we move forward, on equal ground. Some days that means strategy meetings. Other days, it means dinner with in-laws who are still learning how to handle the new normal. But every day, It means I choose the kind of respect I demand and the kind of legacy I build. Not inherited. Earned. So if you're listening right now and someone's underestimated you, if they've decided your silence equals weakness, your background equals smallness, or your love means they get to set the terms, remember this. You don't have to scream. You don't have to fight dirty. You just have to know who you are, know your worth, back it up with proof, and be willing to walk away if that worth isn't honored. Sometimes power isn't about dominance. It's about presence. Sometimes the biggest shift happens not when you raise your voice, but when you calmly rewrite the rules. I did, and I'd do it again. Now tell me your story. Have you ever been backed into a corner and stood your ground? Have you ever let them think they had you, and then turn the tables? I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Let's make this space a home for the underestimated. And if this story hit something inside you, if you've ever had to fight for your seat at the table, hit like, share it, and subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to sign the version of your life someone else wrote for you.